Hi, my name is Joe Ballegeeer. I am the RDC administrator at the Philadelphia Federal Statistical Research Data Center. I'm here to talk today about some information regarding what data is available inside the RDC, and then also kind of go through how to access that data and try to provide prospective researchers with some useful information about what might be helpful for their projects. It's just a bit about how I have this presentation organized. A lot of the data and information I'm going to go over, there's just so much of it that I don't really have time to go through in detail each slide, or sorry, I don't have time to go through in detail each data set that we make available. So hopefully I'll present a overview of kind of give you an idea of everything that is available and enough interest to go and explore deeper because there's more than I mentioned here, and what I mentioned here is going to be very brief. So hopefully this is just a good taste for what we have available. All right, so to begin with, what exactly is a federal statistical research data center? These FSRDCs are a network of computer labs around the country that are a collaboration between the US Census Bureau, obviously, other federal statistical agencies, as well as local research consortiums of local institutions. Effectively, these facilities provide a secure space for researchers external to the Bureau an opportunity to work with restricted use data. The RDC itself is a small computer lab within the Federal Reserve Bank here that provides access to the census computing framework. The data itself is housed there at Census and then just remotely log in from here. And the physical network and computing environment is all managed by the Census Bureau. Creating the RDC network, providing this opportunity, is a way that the Census Bureau kind of manages two different goals. One goal, obviously, is privacy and protection of data for all respondents. We want people to be confident when they respond to census data that or census surveys that their responses and their answers and their information will be kept secret or private. But the other opportunity is making this data available to researchers who have a statistical need for it. So we make it available while also being sure that the research being done and the results being released do protect the privacy of individuals. I'll go into a little bit more detail later, but as a teaser, here is just a glimpse of all the data that we have available. Agencies that make their data available in the RDC. We have tax records from the IRS, EEOC claims, and enforcement data, health data from AHRQ, NCHS, CDC, and then also from other more prominent statistical organizations such as BLS and BEA are available. As for University of Pennsylvania and its access is through the Philadelphia Federal Statistical Research Data Center here that's housed here at the Federal Reserve Bank in Old City, Center City, Philadelphia. Other consortium members are Drexel, the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, and the University of Delaware. What this means for you as a researcher is that you have access to work from the bank here as well as to the data itself at no additional cost. The consortium membership covers the fees for researchers affiliated with the institution. And quick note, the address, we're here at 10 North Independence Mall, so right across from the Constitution Center. Beyond Philadelphia, there are 33 RDCs as of right now across the United States. We're in the process of opening more every year. And what this gives to researchers here in Philadelphia is an opportunity to collaborate with researchers at other institutions around the country. So all research must be done within the bank here, within the RDC environment. And so in order to work with, say, you have co-authors in Los Angeles or Seattle, Chicago, Florida, Texas, anywhere you see a dot or a name on the list here, we have an RDC location. So you can effectively work with partners in the Pacific time zone on the same computer, the same data, using all the same scripts. So it allows for quite a bit more collaboration than would otherwise be possible. So I'll discuss more later, but I just want to touch on what accessing the restricted data. Accessing the restricted data is not a simple process. It involves quite a bit of effort on the researcher's part and a little bit of time before actually working with the data. And there's also then restrictions on how you work with the data. So what makes this process worth it is that the microdata itself that is available has benefit or characteristics that aren't publicly available. So much of the census microdata is publicly available already, but the restricted use files have oftentimes carry variables that aren't available publicly at all, and also some of the variables that are available publicly have greater detail. So publicly available geographic variables often end at the county or the zip code. The restricted use files typically go down to the census block or even address in many cases. There's less top coding on things like income, home values, and then there's also greater detail in some variables like ethnicity or country of origin for immigration. And then also there's larger samples are possible using the restricted use data with the linking that's available through the PIC as well. Right. So an advantage of the restricted use data is that you're able to link many of the files together. So there's consistent identifiers across many of the data sets. So for the firm or business data, which isn't publicly available in microfiles at all, is you can link with firm identifiers that are available in all data sets. And then there are also individual identifiers. So we have what's called a PIC that can be used to link a census to an ACS, to American Housing Survey, to the administrative records in the Numinent file. So there's quite a bit of creating larger samples, opportunities to create larger samples with the restricted use data. And then the final option that's available for linking is that much of the restricted use files can then be linked with publicly available files. So the business files, mainly with the business register, that can then be linked across the universe. The business register carries firm names and firm addresses that can be linked to publicly available information, as well as external geographic variables. And then there is opportunities for external data to be linked, to have PICs, person identifiers attached to them and then added to our data mainframe. So as I briefly mentioned a moment ago, the business data, economic data is not available publicly in any form, at least at the respondent level. So one of the main benefits of accessing the RDC is you can work with microdata that is used to produce many of the publicly available statistics that Census creates. So here is a list of all the data files that we make available. We have surveys that come in firm and establishment level. Then we also have the administrative data, which is data that comes from government's course of business, collecting information from businesses when they file their taxes and other purposes. We make available in the form of the the business register, the longitudinal business database, and things along those lines. And then we also have data from import exports, which is the transactions level data. So we have we have transactions level data that are come from imports and exports for goods traded in the United States. All right. So the flagship economic survey are the economic censuses completed every 5 years. The goal for these is to cover the universe of businesses, which are around approximately 4 million business locations. Some types of firms that are small or single employers are sampled, but for the large part, we try to sample every business in America. The benefit of these is that they have a wide sample. They cover all businesses, but also we ask a lot of detailed questions. So every business receives one survey that's common to all, and then depending on the industry, we ask industry-specific business questions like the ownership structure, not whether it's a for-profit or incorporated nonprofit, revenue, employment, payroll is available in these, but also the industry-specific things like cost of raw inputs for manufacturers, number of contract workers in other industries, things that are pertinent to some industries but not to others. So you get quite a bit of detail there. The economic census are a very rich data set with great coverage, but the main drawback, obviously, being that they only have data for every 5 years and it's infrequently collected. So to improve on this aspect, we collect a variety of economic surveys called the annual surveys. So where we have the census of manufacturers, there's also the annual survey of manufacturers. Census of retail trade, we also have the annual retail trade survey, and so on. So these surveys collect uh, a similar wealth of variables. So you have the detail, you have the economic census, but a smaller sample at a higher frequency. So they're ideally a representative sample, but not a complete universe like the economic census is. These surveys, which used to be up until recently, were topical, as you can see in the list here from the services annual survey and things like those, have all been now combined into a single annual integrated economic survey that replaces all these and will still carry targeted surveys, but still be collected in one frame so that data is easier to work with for end researchers. Linking this data to can be linked to external business data, either through name or if you have files that carry EIN, this data all carries EIN as well. All right, moving on to some of the administrative data I mentioned before. This data is primarily in the form of either the County Business Patterns Business Register or the Longitudinal Business Database. The Integrated Longitudinal Business Database is similar to the LBD, but it is only restricted to non-employers and non-farm businesses. But the Business Register is an administrative data set that covers all establishments in the United States and carries the number of employees, firm revenue, and then firm address. Then, taking from the Business Register, the census has constructed a research database called the Longitudinal Business Database that takes the information of when firm identifiers appear or disappear from the Business Register and looks using census information and external information to create organizationally consistent birth or death variables. So oftentimes a firm identifier or establishment identifier may disappear from our records either through a merger, an acquisition, or some other organizational change that isn't an actual firm death. So using census records and other publicly available records, we try to make it consistent for a earliest firm birth in despite of mergers or acquisitions. A few additional popular surveys that we collect beyond the two are the colloquially called the lifted. So this is the longitudinal foreign trade transaction database. This is the transaction data I mentioned before that is a product level. So each product that comes through foreign trade is listed in this with exports or imports above $2,500 or $2,000. An additional survey is the medical expenditure panel survey, the insurance component, which actually is not a panel survey in this instance. It is a cross-sectional survey of businesses and asks them to questions around the health benefits they provide their employees. And then finally, the annual business survey, which is a descendant of previous surveys, such as the survey of business owners, annual survey of entrepreneurs, and business R&D and innovation micro business surveys. And what the ABS does is it collects information about the owners of business, such as demographics, number of owners who started when they started the company, and how they financed starting the company. So this one gets that kind of firm formation. All right, so now I'll turn to some of the data that Census may be well known for, including the self-titled album, the Decennial Census. This is available in 10-year intervals starting at 1950. Each census year saw minor and major revisions, so the data can vary. Since 2010, the census long form has been replaced by the American Community Survey. which takes a 1% sample of the US every year and asks more detailed demographic questions. In addition to these sort of headline surveys, there are also more targeted surveys like the National Crime Victimization and the Survey of Income and Program Participations. Again, this slide is a useful breakdown to provide information about the surveys to you that I can't go through in detail here. But some key information to pay attention to are the RDC years, which is the years that we make available of the restricted use data, as well as the geographic unit. So what geography is this data available at and valid down to? Right. So, like the business data, we had some administrative records that we used to share or to create research files. We also have a few of them on the demographic side. The first is the NUMIDENT, which comes from Social Security Administration. Like it says here, this is birthplace, birth date, death date, all coming from Social Security records. We have the census household composition key, which takes from the NUMIDENT and creates a family structure variable. So where you have a person identifier, you can also have a parent identifier and create sort of a family structure out of the records there. So you have parent and child linkages. And then finally, the master address file, which is the sampling frame for our demographic data, which is we try to make a yearly snapshot of all addresses of persons in the United States, or place of residence for all people in the United States. It carries a person identifier, address, as well as geocodes and coordinates for place of residence. So a very handy file for things like mapping. And then where these data sets are valuable on their own, they gain quite a bit of power from the linkages that are available. So I mentioned earlier that there are what you can see here below the census household composition key, the reference to a PIC there. That's an identifier that is available and can be used to link to respondents throughout the census demographic file. So where the ACS is a person level cross section each year, any of those people can then be linked to the census household, or sorry, the master address file, and we can then observe where people live and where they move and what neighborhoods they relocate to through time, despite not only having them appear in 1 year of the ACS. All right, some additional administrative demographic data sets here. We have SNAP, TANF, and WIC, which are state level files for benefits provided to households within each state, and what benefits are provided from each state to each person. The Moving to Opportunity Survey, which was a randomized housing experience administered by HUD. The demonstration program gave low-income families with children who are living in public housing or assisted housing in high-poverty neighborhoods a chance to relocate. So this sample is made up of 4,600 families that were deemed eligible and provided vouchers. So this data was collected on participants multiple times between 1994 through 2010 and has been used to study many questions about the effects of neighborhood and gentrification topics along those lines, which is available as well. And then finally, the Criminal Justice Administrative Records, CJARS, is microdata from partnering agencies that follows individuals that have been through the criminal justice system. So any contact with arrests, defendants, and probation is often available through this data here. A little bit more information about the CJAR. So it's a longitudinal electronic records from criminal justice agencies. This data is harmonized across all systems to be usable or convenient and usable for researchers, and it contains 150 million criminal justice events and 30 million individuals. The important is this data is anonymized and it can be linked to other census records. All right, so some administrative data set that come from the SSA. So these are files that supplement our surveys like the ACS and the CPS. We have from here we get the master beneficiary record, the summary earnings records, and the detailed earnings records. And what these files are is they are linked to the demographic surveys, like I mentioned, the ACS, where as a cross section, we link lifetime earnings available from the as reported to the Social Security Administration, is then linked to the ACS, and then is available for a longitudinal time series of income for individuals that appear even only once in the census files. As I mentioned already before, just to reiterate some of the benefits of demographic data, we have individual and household records, which have less top coding, less censoring. So on things like income in the ACS, home values, age are censored there. We have additional variables like date of birth, so you can actually get true age and date they were born, which can be important in various natural experiments. The larger sample is achieved through linkages, and then more detailed geography. So a little bit more information about the PIC and how you can achieve these linkages. So the PIC is a unique census identifier. We attach it to all individuals that appear in census surveys using personal information that is then scrubbed from the files that are available to researchers. Many of the census demographic data contain this PIC, as well as partner agencies have submitted their data for being picked as well. So this data, this PIC acts sort of like a social security number that is available, is consistent across all surveys. So as an individual appears in the decennial census, the ACS, the master address file, the person can be linked through all these records. And then finally, another possibility for linkage is by geography. With the low-level geographies that are available in the RDC, researchers can create external data. You bring in external data on, say, tax programs or incentives that are available at small geography levels like the block level or the group level, can then be linked to the small low-level geographies that are available within the restricted data. Okay, and then the last type of census data that I'd like to draw attention to is really one of the most popular data sets, most powerful that we have at the Census Bureau. This is the this is the LEHD. So the LEHD is the bridge between the two universes of census data. So we have business data and we have the demographic data, which each have their own set of identifiers. The LHD comes from, this LHD provides individual employment records for all individuals working in the United States. So we have place of work, place of residence, and then the accompanying identifiers for each of those. So the person identifier, the business identifier where they work at, and then their home address. And so what this allows researchers to do is to track people based on their place of employment. You can see individuals moving from one firm to another firm and which firm they work with. So then you can take restricted use, you can take the demographic data that you have on persons and apply that to firms. And this is available at quarterly intervals, and it comes from state unemployment insurance. So it's approved on, projects are approved on a state-by-state basis. So it's feasible that you won't have all states, but oftentimes you'll have enough states to work with. And so here's a graphic demonstrating the linkages that are possible. So the LEHD has employer files, job level files, and person files. The person files can then link directly to the demographic data, pulling in things like age, race, gender, education level, occupation can be pulled in from the demographic data, and then linked over through the LHD to the business data. So economic surveys, the economic censuses, the annual surveys, research developed files can then be linked through over to the LHD for a very powerful sample of data. Finally is the U-metrics data, which is data from universities measuring the impact of research on innovation competitiveness. This data comes from 32 universities and carries information on grants awarded and business paid by the grants, and what research was done what research was done under these grants, and then can be linked to internal census data from individuals and firms. Okay, so that was a very rapid overview of what census data is available. In addition to the census data, we have restricted use data from other federal statistical agencies. These files are managed by the individual agency themselves and just made available through the RDC. So proposals for these and ownership of these files will go through the partnering agency. And something to be aware of is there's typically additional fees for accessing partner agency data through the RDC, even for consortium members. So if this data is of interest for any researchers, it's a good idea to reach out to the agency directly. If you just Google, so you can Google the BEA RDC. Typically, the first result will be the information for the BEA RDC files and a good contact for that. So that's a great place to start. All right. So the first set of data I want to discuss is the NCHS. NCHS makes, like the census microdata, makes much of their files available online. But a similar thing exists with RDCs where you have access to additional variables like the geographic variables, linked products, which aren't possible, some sensitive information such as genetic variables, time variables are available through the RDCs that aren't available with the publicly available files. Another health data set we have is from the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. This is the agency that sponsors the Medical Expenditure Panel Survey. And in this set is where you actually see the panel component with the household component here. The household component is publicly available to some degree, but the provider component, insurance component, nursing home, the rest of those files aren't available anywhere except through the RDC. And in the household component, which is publicly available, we make available, can be linked to the other data you see here, as well as have lower level geographies, state codes, non-public use elements, as well as imputed codes. The BLS makes a few of their surveys, not all of their surveys available through the RDC. So unfortunately, the monthly CPS is not available here. However, they do make available some great products such as the national longitudinal surveys, as well as the producer price indices. BEA data primarily provides data on international trade. These files can be linked directly to the census files at the firm level. One important caveat for this data is that researchers requesting BEA data must be US citizens. Okay, so again, that was a quick highlight of the partner agency data, as well as much of the census files that we make available through the RDC network. And now I'm going to discuss the process for actually getting access to this data. How can you as a researcher, what do you have to do to be able to come in here and work in the RDC? So the general process, the way you go about this is the proposal drafting. So that's the first stage. Then it gets submitted to review. Researchers must submit for a background check, and then you actually get to conduct the analysis in the RDC. Then that analysis, once you want to have output output released for publication, that has to be reviewed for disclosure review, and then that's available for researchers to use. Okay, so the first step in the process, as I just mentioned, is the proposal. All proposals will go through what we call the standard application process on website researchdata.gov.org. Before submitting a proposal, it is strongly recommended that researchers reach out to me or their local RDC administrator before submitting to the SAP. I also strongly recommend, as soon as you have an idea, as soon as you think this data may be useful to you, reach out to me, and we can start discussing the feasibility of the project, whether or not this data actually matches up to your research needs. I'm oftentimes maybe aware of data sets that we have available that you may not have considered for your project. And then once we move on to the actual development of the proposal itself typically looks like a standard research prospectus, except there's different items that the census reviewers will focus on that aren't typical to, say, a grant proposal. So you share with me, and I can help. Sorry, you share with me, and then I can kind of help tailor it to make sure you're providing information demonstrating feasibility to the census reviewers. Okay, so once a proposal is in shape to submit through the SAP, it is channeled to census reviewers. These reviewers will look for specific criteria, and again, this is where I can kind of help in the proposal process itself, is making sure we meet these criteria. The demonstrated need for non-public data, scientific merit, methodology, these things are kind of the bare minimum to even considering a project. You as a researcher are going to be more of an expert in your field and your methods than I am. So that's usually the easiest part to clear. Where I'll help the most in making sure a proposal is ready to submit to the SAP is first with feasibility. So the things that census reviewers will look for are going to be, can the data you're requesting be used to answer the questions you're proposing? And so oftentimes there's things like unit of observation mismatch between data sets, or the research question that makes a project not feasible. And I can really help identify that and make sure your proposal demonstrates that to the reviewers. And then the other one is going to be the benefits to the census. There are 13 criteria of a benefit that every project must meet in order to be approved for RDC research. Ideally, every project will meet one of these criteria in the regular course of the analysis research already has in mind. So the workflow that I like to encourage with researchers preparing proposals is to, before considering the benefits, draft up your methodology, draft up the other portions, the data sets that you want, write out how you're going to research questions, and get a pretty clear idea of what it is you want to pursue as your project, and then share it with me. And then hopefully we can work together to identify a benefit in something you're already doing, and then you can write up that benefit. Some of these are easier hurdles to reach than the other, but a lot of work has been done to support the Census Bureau through these benefits. All right. The next step in the proposal process is going to be special sworn status. This is simply just a background check that census researchers must submit to. SSS for partner agencies is typically the responsibility of researchers, but the census projects absorb the costs there. Foreign nationals are eligible for SSS, but they must have lived in the United States for 3 of the past 5 years in order to qualify. And we count this in monthly increments. So say you're a graduate student or a recent faculty member where you're a foreign national, but went to grad school in the United States. So you have so you're in the United States for 9 months, leave for a month or two, come back for 9 months, come back for 10 months. As long as a cumulative of 36 months is reached before applying for SSS, you're able to work on an RDC project. All right, so once special status is received, then researchers can work on can begin working on their RDC projects. What working at RDC is like is that all work has to be done inside the RDC itself. The RDC is basically a computer lab where researchers will log on to a terminal and access the data itself and computing resources at headquarters in Maryland. There's no internet access or personal computers in the lab. All research has to be conducted inside the RDC. However, researchers are able to write scripts at home. So if you want to use Google and look up Stack Exchange for figuring out how to get a script to work, or there's many AI clients now that can produce very efficient coding for analysis. That can all be done at home. If you produce a script, you can share it with me, and then I can make that available inside the RDC. And here we have SAS, Stata, R, MATLAB, Python, QGIS. So all the big ones. If there's pretty much any analysis can be done using one of these programs. So hopefully this is sufficient to any of your needs. And then a nice friendly reminder here at the end that there is a penalty for disclosure of $250,000 and or 5 years in prison. The good news is we put in a lot of security and fail safes, this whole proposal process, working from the labs. We make it very difficult to accidentally disclose information. So as long as you follow our guidelines, data will be protected. A new option that was recently launched is the Virtual Access RDC. This program was part of a 2018 Evidence Act that is expanding access to researchers around the country. The eligibility for a project to work from remote access is on a data set by data set basis. So the data owner gets to approve whether or not their data is made available through the virtual access. And so a project must have only data sets that's approved for virtual access in order to be eligible for this program. Either during the proposal stage or once you begin working at RDC, I'm happy to discuss which data sets these are, if virtual remote access is important to you. And you can kind of tailor your project around which data sets you would like to work with. All right. The final step of working from the RDC is releasing estimates. So once you've worked in the RDC, you've conducted all your analysis, you've got a nice set of results you'd like to share with the world, then these results must be submitted for a disclosure avoidance review. All output goes through the DA review, and this is to ensure that the privacy standards, the thresholds for disclosure that we have set are met by any estimate that's released. We also consider topics that are outside of scope of the proposal. So all students, we also consider topics that are out of scope of the proposal to ensure that everything that was approved in the proposal is what's being released. And final results, things like this may seem kind of like a distant future consideration, not really relevant right now. However, if we have any grad students who are on very strict timelines for their research, considering working in the RDC, just be sure to budget in time for this disclosure review process. It can oftentimes take a couple of weeks, depending on what time of year it is, what kind of workload is at Census at the time. So just be aware if you're creating a timeline for yourself, there's the front and the back end of the research process where there's things to consider. And so as I mentioned, the timeline here is, so this is speaking from once a proposal is ready to submit. The proposal itself can take, I've seen proposals be developed in 2 weeks. I've seen proposals take 2 years to develop. That portion is up to you as the researcher. Once it's ready, once we've gone back and forth and we both agree, everyone agrees that this is ready to submit. From that point, the census review is typically around 12 weeks. So within 3 months, the census will get back to you. Once census approves, there's additional agency approvals that can take an additional 12 weeks as well. Then once the project is fully approved, can the researchers then submit and begin the SSS packet and consideration for that. SSS review is typically around another 12 weeks. Again, that time frame can change a little bit depending on the researcher and other considerations. Like I said here, for non-citizens, it can oftentimes take longer than the 16-week time frame here. So from submission to in the RDC working on it, it's best to budget, I say around 6 to 8 months once a proposal is submitted. So that's something to consider. And then finally, the project duration. Again, so as I said, this 6 to 8 months take quite a bit of time to review, quite a bit of front-end cost for the researchers here. But the project can be from 3 to 5 years. So you can include quite a bit of research in that 5-year time frame. Again, it's good to budget extra time for data wrangling, things like that. The data sets are often take quite a bit more curation than publicly available data sets. So it's good to budget in lots of time, budget what you need, and then ideally you can include one, two, three, 4 different papers to be released out of a project, as long as they're all under the same umbrella, research umbrella, to get the most out of an RDC project here. Yep. And so, and then once that happens, then you're good to start in the RDC. All right. And so that's all I have. I appreciate your time. Thanks for having me. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. This is my email address here. Jeff Lynn, he is the executive director. He can also answer questions. And then there's more information regarding anything I've discussed today at the FSRDC website or census.gov. Thank you.